Good afternoon. Welcome to This Week in Turkey. Today we're joined by former Ambassador Oğuz Demiralp, and we'll be talking about the agreement reached between Turkey and Russia in Sochi on Monday over Syria's Idlib. Good afternoon, Mr. Demiralp. Welcome to This Week in Turkey.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Thank you.
So, can you start by explaining the overall framework of the agreement reached between Vladimir Putin and President Erdogan in Sochi this week?
Yeah, I will try to do so, but to better understand this agreement, I believe we need to simplify things. Simple scenario, Russia and Syria say we need to attack, to organize a massive attack to Idlib in order to eliminate undesirable elements. And Turkey replies, don't do that, you will cause a major humanitarian disaster, as a result of which there will be a massive influx into Turkey or near Turkey. So then Russia and Syria say, okay, then that's your problem, it's not our problem, but we cooperate with you, so you figure out something in order to address also our problem. Then Turkey says, give me some time, I will try to clear Idlib from undesirable elements. And the time is given, the agreement is there, so Turkey has assumed, let's say, a responsibility or a commitment to clear Idlib from undesirable elements until 15th of October. So that means maybe some of the extremist groups will have to leave Idlib, or at least they will have to abandon their heavy weaponry. And then if the operation is successful, there will be no humanitarian disaster or catastrophe in Idlib. That is the gist of the agreement, I believe.
Mr. Demiralp, do you think this is a permanent solution, a permanent agreement, or a makeshift one, perhaps?
No, it is not a permanent agreement. But it's a necessary agreement from the point of Turkey, but it can be durable if the operation is successful. And durable till when? Till the final solution of the Syrian conflict is reached. But let's see. So, I mean, if Turkey can hold its can hold the agreement from her part, but I am not so sure about Syria and Russia. But we have to see. Turkey has to try this.
And what do you think are some of the risks associated with this agreement from a Turkish perspective?
From a Turkish perspective, there is the risk of clashes with some groups in Idlib who would not want to abandon the heavy weaponry or to leave the region. And there's also the risk of clashes among opposition groups themselves, because they are diversified. They are not organized under one umbrella. Some of them are close to Turkey, some of them are not close to other countries and other tendencies. We'll see, but there is the risk of armed clashes in the region.
And for some analysts, this agreement was a victory for Erdogan, as he was very much against an offensive by the Syrian government on Idlib. Is this really so, in your opinion?
The international community was against the offensive of a Syrian-Russian offensive. It's only Russia and Syria act together. I do not think it's a victory. I think it's a damage limitation attempt. Because whatever Turkey is doing now is to further limit the damage caused by our own policies, since the beginning of this crisis.
And in your opinion, again, could Turkey have made any concessions for this agreement to be reached in Sochi this week?
We do not know whether there is other agreements struck behind the closed doors, but if you consider the original objectives, Turkey regarding Syria and the position of Turkey now, it is already a story of concession.
And let's focus on possible opportunities now. What has Ankara gained from this agreement?
Well, there's a real opportunity, rather a lesson from which could be very useful for Ankara, because regarding Idlib, the position of Turkey has broadly coincided with the position of Western countries and with the position of international organizations such as UN. And on the other hand, Russia needs Turkey in order to continue the Astana process. So it was a case in point where Turkey proved useful for both sides. So the lesson is that Turkey does not have to make strong choices and to turn its back to the West. It can be successful in the Middle East, in Syria as well, as long as it proves indispensable for both sides. So the Idlib case is an example of what Turkey can do. If
And
it manages successfully its foreign policy.
Finally, Mr. Demiralp, conflict now, right, as of now after Sochi, seems to have been averted in Idlib for a while at least. And Idlib is estimated to be home to around 2.5 million civilians and around 50,000 militants. Obviously, the numbers aren't certain. But my question to you is, in case of a future conflict in the region, what do you think will happen to this civilian and militant population?
If there is a conflict, if there is a massive onslaught on offensive on Idlib, there will be a major humanitarian disaster, probably the worst we have seen since the start of the Syrian crisis, of the Syrian internal war. I hope this will not happen. Turkey should be very careful and should be in dialogue with international organization and with Western countries. Dialogue only with Russia is not enough.
Oğuz Demiralp, thank you very much for your comments and for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Our guest on This Week in Turkey today was former Ambassador Oğuz Demiralp, who commented on the Turkey-Russia agreement reached in Sochi this week over Syria's Idlib. And now we'll continue with our next news video. Following his meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin in the Russian city of Sochi on Monday, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said Turkey and Russia have decided to form a demilitarized zone between rebels and government forces in Syria's Idlib region.
Russia and Turkey signed an agreement to prevent a Syrian government offensive in Idlib this week. Signed on September 17th in Sochi between the leaders of Russia and Turkey, the agreement will create a large demilitarized zone and is supposed to lead to radical terrorist groups being removed from parts of Idlib by October 15th. However, the agreement does not spell out how terrorist groups will be removed from parts of Idlib or which groups must be removed, leaving open the possibility of future conflicts. Russia and Turkey are guarantors of the observance of the ceasefire, and the document says it follows similar de-escalation agreements that have been in place in Idlib since 2017. After the Assad government successfully took back areas near Jordan and the Golan, it now wants to reconquer Idlib from the rebels and extremist groups. However, the US has warned Assad against using chemical weapons, and the UN warns of a humanitarian catastrophe that could affect millions. The Russia-Turkey deal has been broadly welcomed as an opportunity to forestall the full-scale Syrian government offensive against Idlib that has been widely feared, averting the humanitarian catastrophe it was expected to trigger. The Syrian government said in a statement carried by the official Syrian Arab News Agency that it welcomed any initiative that stops bloodshed and contributes to security and stability in each inch that was struck by terrorism. Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif said Iran, a close ally of Syria, played a role in negotiating the agreement, which he hailed as evidence that diplomacy works. Idlib residents took to the streets to demonstrate against Syrian President Bashar al-Assad and celebrate their relief that an offensive had at least been deferred. But it remains unclear whether the deal will prevent an eventual conflict in the area. Moreover, the nature of the demilitarized zone and how it would be implemented are not yet clear.
Turkey's new economic program for 2019 and 2021 was unveiled by Finance and Treasury Minister Berat Albayrak yesterday.
Turkey's new economic plan was unveiled yesterday. Announcing the program, Treasury and Finance Minister Berat Albayrak said it was based on three fundamental pillars: stabilization, discipline, and transformation. A public finance transformation and change office has been established under the new economic program, Albayrak said. We will use all necessary policies and measures to overcome economic challenges. We expect the stabilization process for next year and 2020. So the new economic program aims for 2.3% economic growth in 2019, 3.5% in 2020, and 5% by 2021, he added. Albayrak said that this year's economic growth target is 3.8%. According to the new economic program, Turkey is targeting a 1.9% budget deficit to gross domestic product ratio this year and 1.7% in 2021. Albayrak said Turkey will prioritize investments in pharmaceuticals, energy, and petrochemicals to reduce its current account deficit, which was seen falling to 2.6% of gross domestic product by 2021 from 4.7% seen in 2018. In order to maintain our strong stance in public finance, we have begun to take some measures to ensure the correct use of resources in the public sector starting today, said Albayrak. We will save 60 billion Turkish liras in 2019, the minister added. He also said Turkey would suspend all investment projects for which the tender process has not been finalized, and Turkey would revise its social insurance schemes. On transformation, Albayrak said that the main target is to focus on value-added areas which will boost the country's export volume and long-term production capacity. You will see the most concrete example of this in investment projects that we will support, he added. In creating employment, Albayrak said Turkey will generate 2 million new jobs by the end of the program's period, with an unemployment rate target of 10.8% in 2021.
24 construction workers involved in protests over work conditions at Istanbul's new airport were arrested this week.
A court has jailed, pending trial, 24 people involved in protests over work conditions at Istanbul's new airport last week. The airport is a centerpiece of a 15-year construction boom under President Tayyip Erdogan. It has an initial planned capacity of 90 million passengers a year, making it one of the world's biggest airports. Istanbul's governor said on Sunday more than 400 people were initially detained for taking part in the protests. Work resumed at the airport on Monday with a heavy police and gendarmerie presence, according to labor unions. A total of 43 people among those detained were sent to an Istanbul court to rule on what action would be taken, and it released 19 of them subject to judicial monitoring. The 24 formally arrested and remanded in custody face provisional charges such as resisting police, damaging public property, and contravening the law governing protests. Workers have long complained about food, housing, and work safety conditions at the construction site, which unions have likened to a concentration camp. In February, Turkey's labor ministry said 27 workers had died at the airport since the start of work in 2015, mainly from accidents or health problems. Protests started on Friday after a shuttle bus accident injured 17 workers. Airport operator IGA said on Sunday that the work at the airport was on schedule and the planned October 29th opening would not be delayed. Steps had been taken to improve working conditions and living quarters, which workers say were infested with bedbugs.
Turkey has eased the financial and investment criteria for foreigners to become Turkish citizens this week.
Turkey has significantly eased the required limits for foreigners to acquire Turkish citizenship to encourage investments. According to new regulations published in the official Gazette on Wednesday, foreigners can now become citizens if they own property worth $250,000 for 3 years, down from a previous value set at $1 million. The deposit requirement of minimum $3 million in Turkish banks has also been lowered to $500,000. The lowered limit of fixed capital investments to acquire Turkish citizenship for foreigners has been reduced to $500,000 from $2 million. The new regulations also halve the number of employees an applicant must employ to gain Turkish citizenship to 50 from 100. Foreign investors should hold the properties or continue the minimum limit of financial investments for at least 3 years to meet the criteria for Turkish citizenship. Foreigners purchased $4.6 billion worth of properties last year, with a large proportion of them from Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Russia, according to official data. Turkish house sales dropped 12.5% year-on-year in August. However, property purchases by foreigners were up around 130%, focused mainly in Istanbul and holiday destination Antalya, data showed on Wednesday.
President Erdogan has defended his decision to accept a luxury plane from Qatar at a time of economic hardship, saying it was a gift and not a purchase.
The landing of a Boeing 747-8 that was put on sale last month by the Qatari government triggered a fresh political debate in Turkey. The Boeing 747-8, which is valued at $500 million, was described as the largest and most expensive private jet in the world when it was put on sale last month. The aircraft was reportedly only delivered to Qatar in 2015, having staterooms, lounges, boardrooms, first-class seating areas, and even a hospital. Following the arrival of the jet, an opposition MP tabled a parliamentary question asking Vice President Fuat Oktay to disclose whether it had been purchased by the Turkish government. Opposition MPs argued that the government was using taxpayers' money to buy a jet as the country is facing an economic turbulence. However, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan denied the arguments. Speaking to reporters flying with him from Azerbaijan to Turkey over the weekend, President Erdogan said Qatar's emir had given the plane as a gift after learning that the Turkish government had expressed an interest in it. He said, "I won't take money from Turkey. I give this as a present to Turkey," President Erdogan quoted Sheikh Hamad as saying. Turkey has backed Qatar in a year-long standoff with other Arab states. While Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, and Bahrain severed all diplomatic and trade links with Qatar over its close ties to Iran and its alleged support for jihadists, in a year-long standoff, Turkey has backed Qatar. Turkey sent food to prevent shortages in Qatar's supermarkets after its only land border was closed and ships serving it were banned from many ports. Last month, Qatar's emir had approved a package of economic projects, investments, and deposits worth $15 billion in support of Turkey's economy.
Now we'll take a look at the latest in the UEFA Europa League.
Russia's Lokomotiv Moscow lost 0-3 to Turkey's Galatasaray in a Group D match of the UEFA Champions League in Istanbul on Tuesday evening. The goals were scored by Geri Rogrides, Eren Derdiyok, and Inan Selçuk. Istanbul club Fenerbahçe was defeated by Croatia's Dinamo Zagreb 4-1 at Stadium Maksimir in Zagreb yesterday in their first match in the UEFA Europa League 2018-19 Group D. Dinamo's goals were scored by Ivan Sunjic, Izet Hayrovic, and Dani Olmo. Fenerbahçe missed their only chance to score in the first half when İsmail Köybaşı was awarded a free kick, and their only goal was scored by Roman Neustadter in the 47th minute. Meanwhile, another Turkish team, Akhisar, was defeated by Russia's Krasnodar 0-1 in their first match in the league yesterday. Akhisar played at home against Krasnodar in Group J. The first and last goal of the game came in the 26th minute by Krasnodar's Viktor Clausson. Akhisar had qualified for the Europa League as 2017-18 Turkish Cup winners, while Krasnodar finished fourth in Russia last season. Beşiktaş, another leading Turkish team from Istanbul, beat Norwegian Sarpsborg 3-1 in their first game in Europa League 2018-19 Group I yesterday. The 3 goals of Beşiktaş were scored by Babel, Laiç, and Lenz. Sarpsborg, meanwhile, scored their only goal at 90 plus 4th minute with a powerful header by Zakariasen.
Now let's take a look at what's on in Istanbul next week.
Cecilia Krull, the singer of the soundtrack of the Spanish series La Casa del Papel, will be at the Salon IKSV tonight, having risen to popularity with this song that bonded the audience with the show as much as the story itself. Krull was born to a musician family and started singing at the age of 7. It will be her first time in Istanbul, where she has millions of listeners, to present songs from her debut album. Contemporary Istanbul, the leading annual art fair in the region, will be on until the 23rd of September in the Istanbul Congress Center and Convention and Exhibition Center. Contemporary Istanbul brings together leading international and Turkish contemporary art galleries, offering a platform for the city's thriving art scene and growing art market. The 13th edition of the fair will feature 83 galleries and 22 countries. Contemporary Istanbul is led by Chairman Ali Güreli and Director Kamyar Maleki, alongside Akbank, its main sponsor. The 13th edition of Contemporary Istanbul will coincide with several events in the cultural calendar of the city, including the Global Photography Award, Prix Pictet, and the 4th Istanbul Design Biennial. The 4th Istanbul Design Biennial announces its opening program, A School of Schools, Orientation, which will take place from September 22nd until November 4th. Organized by the Istanbul Foundation for Culture and Arts and sponsored by Vitra, the 4th Istanbul Design Biennial focuses on a multifaceted openness program exploring the possible futures of design education. Held from September 20th to 21st, the orientation days will bring together practitioners, educators, and thinkers from Turkey and around the world for a biennial event conceived as a public space for dialogue, provocation, and production. Together, they will test and review various educational strategies to reflect on the role of design, knowledge, and global connectivity in Istanbul and beyond.
That's all from This Week in Turkey. Thanks for tuning in and hope to see you again next Friday at 5 p.m. Goodbye.